Did you change the setting again? It sounds a little different.
On the piano too. That's the bar. That's the old time bar.
Whatever you say, right, straight up piano. Right in the pocket. Okay, there you go. but that's a different, it's a different tone. Yeah, it sounds, like, no. We can vote though. We can vote though. Plus, it's harder to hear. It doesn't have the sharpness.
See, I hear it better.
I think that's confirmation bias. On my part too. Well, what do you guys think? Billy. Billy. What'd you say, Mike?
I said it likes the piano. Yeah, it surprises me that he hears the other thing better because I
Yeah, that just sounds muddy to me, to my ears. Hey, do you need a drum throne?
I need a what?
A drum throne, so you don't have to have all those pillows stacked up.
You got one of these?
start. Whatever you feel. If you ask us nicely, we'll move stuff a little tighter, make it a little harder for you. Sorry.
So, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to the first ever that I can remember Tu B'Av service here. But I may be wrong. But anyway, in my limited memory, we'll be celebrating Shabbat and Tu B'Av, and I won't take the time to explain that because Janelle's going to explain that later. So keep your questions for the minute. So I would like to first, I'm out here. Is that better, Daniel? Okay, yeah. Okay, so welcome, and we'd like to begin with candle lighting. So Janelle and Lynn, are you? Okay. This candle lighting is on page 120.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehat likner shel Shabbat.
And if you could join me and read together on page 124 on the lower part of the page. May the door of the synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love and all who are lonely for friendship. May it welcome all who have cares to unburden, thanks to express, and hopes to nurture. May the door of the synagogue be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity. May its threshold be no stumbling block to young or straying feet. May it be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness. May the synagogue be, for all who enter, the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life.
So, who knew that we Jews have a Valentine's Day? Does anybody here know that? All right. I certainly didn't know. And I suspect that most of us, at least in the Reform or progressive arm of Judaism, don't know that. What's especially interesting to me is that this event, the 15th of Av, comes only 6 days after the 9th of Av. And the 9th of Av, or Tisha B'Av, is one of the most solemn days in the Jewish calendar, because it is the day of remembrance of the destruction of the first and second temple, and also marks a memory of all of the pogroms, all of the times when Jews have been kicked out of one country or another, and all of the other pain that as a people we've experienced. So that's the 9th of Av, and we would have actually sat here in quiet last Saturday evening to mark the time, except that the service had to be canceled, unfortunately, so we weren't able to be here. But here we are only 6 days later, and it's one of the happiest days in the Jewish calendar, when we would think that we would still be in mourning from Tisha B'Av. So, how did this come about? First of all, we note that the holiday falls on the night of a full moon in the lunar calendar, like Passover, Sukkot, and Tu B'Shvat. The time of the full moon in many ancient cultures is a time to celebrate love and romance and fertility. In general, the rabbis did not seem to think that the practices of ancient cultures explained the holiday. And in the 3rd or 4th century, Rabbi Yaakov bar Acha postulated that Tu B'Av marked the summer equinox, which is kind of between the equinox. It's in the middle of the summer. There are some cultures that celebrate it now as opposed to in June. So the summer equinox was a time when it may have been an agricultural holiday celebrating the grape harvest, which was usually at that time of the year. But what he didn't say was that it might also have been preserving of an ancient form of sun worship, which is not terribly acceptable to us. Notably, though, from the time of the destruction of the Second Temple until the middle of the 20th century, when Israel was established as a state, on Tu B'Av, in the morning prayer service, and this is from 70 AD until 1948, the usual prayer of penitence, which is in all the other morning services, was not to be found on Tu B'Av in the morning prayer service. If the rabbis decided to make such a significant ritual shift in the morning service and eliminate a prayer of penitence on this particular day, something was going on in their minds. But what? We'll try to explore that in a few minutes.
at the time in the service where we normally have the Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, the receiving of Sabbath. And I looked at those Psalms, and they're mostly about praising God, which is, of course, fine, and that's the intent. But I thought for Tu B'Av, maybe we should have something a little bit more about love. So rather than sing or speak the 7 Psalms of Kabbalat Shabbat, let's read a little bit from the Song of Songs. So if you join me on page 129, towards the top of the page, we'll read in English, Dodi Li. This is from the Song of Songs, chapter 2. My beloved is mine, and I am my beloved's, who browses among the lilies. Who is this? Comes from the north, in cloud of mirth and frankincense. You have captured my heart, my sense, my bride. Awake, O north wind, come south wind. So we can all imagine now that the Shabbat bride has walked in, we've sung the Chadodi, and so please join me on page 146 with the Baruch Hu. Please rise if you're able. Baruch Hu et Adonai Hambarach. Baruch Adonai Hambarach Leolam Vaed. And we'll continue. You may be seated. We'll continue on page 150 with Ahavat Olam. And We'll read this in unison in English. Sort of towards the middle of the page. Everlasting love, you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and on your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise you, O Adonai, who loves your people, Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. So please join me on page 152 in reciting the Shema, and on the following page, the Ve'ahavta. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Vayed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol lavacha v'b'chol nafshecha v'b'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavcha ha'om al ha'levanecha shanam tam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shiftecha b'veitecha v'lechtecha v'baderech v'shaftecha uvkumecha ukshartam alidecha v'hayu latotafot beinenecha uvtavtam al mizuzot beitecha uvisharecha Laman tiskaru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'chaytem kadoshim la'Elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem Esher hotzeti etchem Mitzrayim Lechem el Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem Emet. Now it just so happens that those verses, the Shema, are in this week's Torah portion, the Etchanen. And so, well, we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But in any case, comes around once a year. So this is the time in the Torah where Moses recites the Shema and Ve'ahavta. So we've come to the time in the service where we have silent prayer. The Amidah, the standing prayer, is page 164 to 180. On the other hand, you're welcome to pray the silent prayer as it's written, or any of the extra readings, or anything else you'd like. And because of the specialness of this service, I chose to insert in this handout several readings from Rabbi Shefa Gold's Fever of Love book, where she's taken verses from the Song of Songs, and which are in sort of the center of the page, center justified, and then below, left justified, are some thoughts that she's had about those verses from the Song of Songs. So, and they're all in one way or another related to love. So please join me in the standing prayer. Adonai sifatayv tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Osei Shalom Bimromav, Uyasei Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, Ve'yimeru, Amen.
In the Mishnah, that's the oldest part of the Talmud, and the Talmud stretches from about 200 CE to 500 or 600 CE. But the Mishnah is the oral recording that was written down in 200, so it's much older than the time when it was written down. Anyway, in the Mishnah, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who lived just before the Second Temple's destruction, is quoted as having said, "There were no days as happy for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur." You might wonder why Yom Kippur is supposed to be such a happy day, since it's a day of fasting and confession. It's regarded as happy because it emphasizes forgiveness. Yom Kippur, additionally, is the date, by tradition, on which the second set of tablets were given to Moses. Now, Moses had come down from the mountain with the first set of tablets, and he encountered the people worshiping the golden calf. In a rage, he threw the tablets on the ground and broke them, and felt that God's judgment was going to come on the people, and asked for, he was a supplicant, and asked for forgiveness on the part of the people, went back up on the mountain for another 40 days, and at that point, God gave him another set of tablets. And supposedly on that day, we celebrate Yom Kippur. So it's not only a day of confession and of sort of sorrowing about the things that we've done wrong over the course of the year, but a celebration of the forgiveness that we as a people received from God, despite our turning aside and worshiping the golden calf. Beyond that, why Tu B'Av? There are some very mixed clues in the Talmud, about 6 different stories, in fact, try to explain why Tu B'Av, the day of love, is celebrated and why it's especially joyous. In the Bible, in the story of Zelophehad's daughters, when Zelophehad died, his daughters made a request that the land that they had remain in their hands as opposed to going to their husbands-to-be. And it was decided that they could do that as long as they married within the tribe, so that the land didn't get transferred out to any foreign group. And supposedly that was the source of a ban against intermarriage among the 12 tribes. But Rav Yehuda in the 3rd century CE is said to have indicated that Tu B'Av marks the date on which the tribes were finally allowed to intermarry. So somehow the Talmud construed the story to mean that the requirement that women marry within their own tribe, that it only applied to the generation of the daughters of Zelophehad, not to subsequent generations. So people could celebrate cross-tribally. There is a story, a historical story in the book of Judges, which is a little alarming, and which I suspect many of us don't know. But it's about a Levite and his concubine, or maybe it was his legal wife. The claims are sort of mixed on that matter. They were a pair in the land of Ephraim. And for some reason, and the way the text reads, it's that she played the harlot and ran home to her father's house in Judah. But one wonders whether there was something going on between the couple that caused her to flee home from Ephraim to Judah. So her husband, the Levite, waited a while, and after 4 months, he decided to go to Judah and retrieve her. So he went, and he was welcomed by her father, who wined and dined him and tried to persuade him to stay in Judah rather than to go back to Ephraim. But after 4 days, he decided to take her and go back to Ephraim. Now, on their way, they passed through Benjamin, and it was getting dark, and so they tried to find a place where they could stay for the night. But no Benjaminites wanted to have them, and eventually the Levite found an Ephraimite who welcomed them. I mean, the law of the desert basically is that you welcome any stranger or anybody who's looking for housing or help or food. But that did not happen in Benjamin. Well, the Ephraimite put them up, but some Benjaminites, and this sounds a little bit like the story of Lot in Sodom, Benjaminites came to the Ephraimite's house, and they came with the intention of raping the Levite. So, instead of going forth to them, the Levite very kindly offered his concubine and the daughter of his host instead. So the men took the 2 women and went off with them and evidently raped them and murdered the concubine. When that happened, the Levite, this is a biblical story, so it's really quite interesting. He took her body and he dismembered it. And he gave pieces of her body to all of the tribes, except the Benjaminites. And what that did was to set all of the other tribes at war against the Benjaminites. So it was a civil war in the midst of the history of Israel. And the other tribes then swore an oath that they would never again give any of their daughters to any of the men of Benjamin. So after that, some substantial period of time passed, when the other tribes were isolating Benjamin from the rest of the Jewish community. But the sworn oath was eventually dissolved because, as in the previous story, it was said to have applied only to the generation that took the oath to never allow their daughters to marry a Benjaminite. And supposedly it was on the 15th of Av that the tribe of Benjamin was allowed to re-enter the congregation of Israel. And that meant that, of course, Benjaminite men could again wed women from the other tribes. So it was a time to rejoice. There's a third story in the Talmud that suggests that the 15th of Av was a date on which the last of the generation of the spies who had gone to see whether or not Canaan was going to be a good place for the people to move to from the desert. The last of that generation died, and they, of course, had come back with stories, except for 2 of them, that this was a terrible place, people were giants, and we would be wiped out if we went there. And God was so angry that he told the people of the land that is to say the Israelite people, that they were going to have to stay in the desert until all of that generation died. So supposedly, on the 15th of Av, the last of that generation died, and Moses was given permission to continue to the Promised Land. So, in his words, when the Jews realized that the decree that God would not speak to Moses had been lifted, they established that day as a permanent day of rejoicing. Hearkening back to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's words about the 2 happiest days in the calendar being Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av, just as Yom Kippur is a day of forgiveness, so is Tu B'Av, permitting the forgiven Israelites to proceed on their journey toward the Promised Land. Another Talmudic story has to do with the wood burned on the altar and for the sustenance of the eternal flame in the temple. Wood was scarce in Israel at the beginning of the Second Temple period because of the destruction sustained at the time of the exile. So volunteers had to make a dangerous journey to distant regions to find wood. And of course, the wood had to be pristine if it was going to be used in the temple. During the winter, wood would have to last from the preceding summer. The Talmud says that the trees for wood could be chopped down and collected only until the 15th of Av, because after that time the days would shorten and the wood would not dry properly, inviting rot and worminess. So Tu B'Av was a day of celebration. It was a celebration for the trees. This was probably gratitude for the trees, but thinking anthropomorphically, the trees might also have been celebrating. The date was even named the day of the breaking of the scythe. It was apparently a tradition to celebrate the end of the woodcutting season with song and dance. Even in the 20th century, in small towns in Syria, peasants would mark the date with song and dance. There are still other stories, but I'm inclined to believe that the real reason that Tu B'Av is a day of love is simply, as I said, because in many ancient cultures, the full moon invites romance and fertility. When Israel became a state, Zionist Israelis started to bring back the tradition of dancing, singing, and love as a celebration of the day. The Talmud records that the Mishnah taught that the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in white clothes and on the 15th of Av would go out in the vineyards and dance. This seems to have been in the Second Temple period, from at least 530 BCE until the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE. Quoting the Talmud, the sages, that is the rabbis, taught this tradition in greater detail. The daughter of the king borrows white garments from the daughter of the high priest. The daughter of the high priest borrows from the daughter of the deputy high priest. The daughter of the deputy high priest borrows from the daughter of the priest anointed for war, that is, the priest who would read verses of Torah and address the army as they prepared for battle. The daughter of the priest anointed for war borrows from the daughter of a common priest, and all the Jewish people borrow from each other. Why would they all borrow garments? They did this so as not to embarrass one who did not have her own white garments. That's the quote. The young women who were dancing were eligible maidens, singles, looking for husbands. They were not dancing alone under a full moon in the vineyards, but were being observed by and dancing with unmarried men who could not tell which of the women who were dancing in the vineyards could afford expensive dresses and which could not. Apparently, there were few occasions in the year when the tribes would join one another and intermingle. So this was an occasion for a matchmaking party and potential tribal intermarriage. There was not gender equality at the time, so the men were doing the choosing, not the women. But one might wonder if there was not also some signaling going on by the women in the midst of the dancing, kind of below the radar Sadie Hawkins Day. Interestingly, the first reference to Sadie Hawkins Day was in Little Abner, which was a comic that ran, it was about hillbillies, which ran throughout the US and Canada from 1934 until 1977. The strip's creator, Al Capp, came up with that day, Sadie Hawkins Day, and its name. But Al Capp was Jewish. His family name was Kaplan. Might he have been thinking about Tu B'Av when he created the event? Contemporarily, Tu B'Av is a day when young unmarried women are permitted to approach unmarried men. But it is also, in general, a day of love, a day to marry without having to fast before the ceremony, the only day that's true, to propose or to renew vows, a day to give flowers, to sing, and to dance. Happy Tu B'Av.
now it's on us. May we be able to hold the thoughts and feelings from the service tonight with us as we go out into the world. Please join me with reciting Aleinu on page 586, and we'll use the version that starts kind of in the middle of the page. You stand if you're able. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol, l'tet gedula l'yotze bereshit, shalo asanu kogoye ha'artzot, v'lo samanu kimishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, v'gor aleinu kakol hamonam, anachnu komrim, umishtachavim, umodim, lifnei melech, malchei hamolchim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And continuing on page 591, Ne'emar. Ne'emar, V'haya Adonai, L'melech al kol ha'aretz, Bayom hahu, Yehyeh Adonai echad, Ushemo, echad. You seated? We have among us a number of people who are ill or recovering from surgery or a disease, and we'd like to hold them up in our hearts today. If we will recite the Mishaberach on page 511. Let me remind you of a few people in our congregation who certainly need our thoughts. Fred Leopold, Ezra Sixdog, Fern Levin, mother of Randy Levin, Bernard Reiner, husband of Joyce Reiner, and Mort Meyerson. If you have another name you'd like to hold up, please mention. Lynn? Right. Pardon? Mishaberach ahavotenu makor habracha La'imotenu, may the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu L'chor Avraham Li'avotenu. May those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. In the last few days, a member of our community passed away, Daniela Stoffel, mother of Leona Catalan and son of Amir Lukowitz. As well, Ellen Ornitz's sister, we'd like to remember Laurel Rachel Ornitz, Lisa Mueller's mother, Larry Lederman, brother of Sharon Lederman and brother-in-law of Randy Levin, Kate Klingensmith's brother Dave, Maury Dornberg, father of Dane Dornberg, Wendy Marquis' husband Michael, Steve Zimmerman lost his wife Suzanne Zimmerman, and Henry and Rhoda Sue Bertouf lost their grandson Matthew Bertouf. May their memories be a blessing. May their families find comfort in their pain. if there's anyone else you'd like to remember his name, raise their name before we say Kaddish. Please do so. Yes? If it's your custom to say Kaddish for the community, please rise and join me. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah, v'alma divra kirute, v'yamlich malchute, v'chayachon v'yomechon, v'v'chad dekal Beit Yisrael, ba'gala v'zman kariv v'yimeru. Yehei shmei rabbah barach marvach, le'olam amayu. Yitbarach v'yitbarach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitramam, v'yitnaseh, v'yit hadar, v'yit halev, v'yit halal, shmei dekudashah, brichu. Le'elamin kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran v'alama yimru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba in shemaya, v'chaim aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael, v'yimru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'yimru. Amen. Please be seated. It's time for announcements. First, the biggest announcement of the century. Congratulations to Rabbi Sonia and Daniel with the arrival of their daughter on Wednesday evening. And her name is top secret, not even in President Trump's files. So we'll find out at the baby naming ceremony coming up shortly. And I also, before I forget, I want to thank our musicians here, organized by Ed Lewis and Billy Lazar. Do you want to introduce the rest of your ensemble, Ed? Hey, wow. We don't normally applaud in the synagogue. We go like this. So, wow. Great. Way to go, guys. This is amazing. And they're going to play a little postlude. So if you haven't had enough while we get ready for wine and kiddush and motzi, we'll get another cut at it. Yes?
So if you want to know what the baby name is, come to the baby naming ceremony. 2 weeks from tonight.
2 weeks, right. Okay. Great. A couple other announcements. We'll have Torah study tomorrow morning at 9:30, and we'll be looking at Parsha V'etchanan, and as I mentioned, it has the Shema in it and the Ten Commandments, second time around, and a lot of other really interesting stuff. It's a really packed Parsha. Also, there's going to be some work here at the synagogue. Thank you in advance to who all is going to be doing that. Next week, there's Mahjong on Tuesday, and next Friday, there will be a learner's minyan in the evening and on Zoom, and also the kids are all going to camp. Camp Yala, Montana, at Camp Minnegagosh up in the Boulder Creek area. So this is a real first. I think we've talked about this many times, but I don't think we've ever actually pulled it off. I mean, COVID got in the way and stuff. So this is a real big event for in fact, all Jewish communities in Montana are invited to get rid of their kids for the weekend. So anybody? Are there any other announcements that I should make? No. Okay. Well, hearing none, then while we get the wine and the bread out, I'm going to turn it over to the ensemble to play us out. See, this one is wine. Okay, and there's grape juice coming. Okay, I've got the wine, so now we'll have the grape juice. Okay, this is the wine, yeah, right. This is wine. This one is wine, and there's some grape juice on the other tray. Okay, Janelle's got the grape juice. Okay, this is the wine, and Janelle. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratza banu v'shabbat kadsha v'ahava v'ratzon hinchilanu zicharon l'maseh Bereshit, ki hu yom techila lemikroei kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'charta ve'otanu kidashta im kol hamim. V'shabbat kadshecha v'ahava ratzon hinchaltanu baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-shabbat. L'chaim. Notice the word ahava, love, in the Kiddush. And we're blessed today with a loaf of challah from Wild Crumb, which Lynn has. So we're going to take the cover off. We're going to cut it into pieces. So, whoops. Okay, got it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam hamotzi lechem min haaretz v'te'avon. Okay, let's see. Maybe best to do it on the table or on the stender. Yeah. So while Lynn cuts the bread, again, I want to thank our musicians. I also want to thank Daniel for working the soundboard here. Make sure got it all right. I think we.